For centuries, humanity has strived to unravel the mysteries of its existence, define its place in the world, and above all, comprehend the profound meaning of its own individuality. In this challenging journey of self-discovery, many find themselves trapped in destructive relationships, encountering situations that drain their vitality, and falling into recurring patterns that seem like an inescapable fate. But what if there's a fundamental explanation for these phenomena? Carl Jung, a prominent explorer of the human psyche, dedicated his life to studying the mysteries of the unconscious. One of his most significant legacies is the assertion that the external world is a reflection of our internal state. Perhaps each of us has faced a situation where, despite a sincere desire to be kind and responsive, to help others and give love, we invariably find ourselves surrounded by those who seem to abuse our energy, manipulate us, or simply drain us from within. It's as if some hidden part of our personality, against our will, attracts precisely the negative scenarios we most wish to avoid. It is at this point that Jung urges us to look beyond the visible surface of phenomena. The reality we perceive is not merely a random collection of events, but a direct manifestation of the contents of our unconscious. When an individual lacks genuine self-love, their inner energy emits certain vibrations that others unconsciously pick up. This happens unknowingly but powerfully, influences the formation of relationships and life circumstances. What lies behind these vibrations, and how do they shape our reality? The answer to this question can be the key to liberation from recurring negative patterns and the building of a harmonious life. In his works, Carl Jung delves into the profound concept of the shadow, that hidden area of our personality where we repress undesirable traits, qualities, and impulses that don't align with our idealized self-image. Surprisingly, this shadow side doesn't vanish with a wave of a magic wand when we choose to ignore it. On the contrary, everything we reject within ourselves persistently seeks an outlet, striving to manifest in our lives in various ways. The most common way for the shadow to appear is through the people we unconsciously attract into our lives. Imagine an inner voice that tirelessly whispers, "I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy of love. I must constantly prove my worth." This voice cannot be silenced by simple affirmations or the naive hope that someone else can neutralize it. It is reflected in our self-perception and in how we allow others to treat us. If a deep-seated conviction that love must be earned is rooted within, a person will attract individuals and situations into their life that reinforce this destructive belief. These might be relationships demanding constant sacrifices and compromises, yet never delivering a sense of unconditional acceptance and value. However, the essence is that genuine self-love isn't merely a collection of inspiring statements or attempts to convince oneself of one's own worth. True self-love, which Jung encouraged us to cultivate, emerges when an individual begins to accept and integrate their shadow side, ceasing to flee from those aspects of their being that were previously rejected. It's impossible to heal what one isn't willing to see, yet most people spend their lives concealing emotional wounds instead of addressing their healing. The process of shadow integration can be uncomfortable, as it involves confronting everything one has tried to avoid. This implies realizing that many relationships were not just coincidental, but the result of an internal program that compelled one to seek precisely such connections, albeit unconsciously. But the most important point is this: when a person truly begins to love themselves, they don't need to take any special actions for toxic people to distance themselves. It happens naturally. Consider this: individuals who feed on others' energy, prone to manipulation, control, or exploiting someone else's insecurities, cannot long remain near someone who has embraced their shadow. They are like predators seeking easy prey, but upon realizing they face a whole and self-sufficient person, devoid of exploitable vulnerabilities, they simply retreat. This occurs not because they are rejected, but because they can no longer find what they were looking for. True self-love represents an invisible yet extraordinarily strong bastion. This feeling is devoid of arrogance, pride, or defensive reactions. It is a powerful and stable energy that repels those who do not match its frequency. This is precisely where the transformative power of self-acceptance lies. When a person begins to genuinely love themselves, individuals who resonate with their inner world appear in their life. This happens not from desperate searching, but as a result of a shift in their energy field, which attracts only those who are in harmony with it. How does one achieve this state? Carl Jung asserted that the starting point is self-awareness. It's impossible to change what you don't acknowledge. Therefore, it's necessary to look at yourself honestly. You should ask, what types of relationships have I attracted in the past? What behavioral patterns keep repeating in my life? Which aspects of my personality have been suppressed? There are no right or wrong answers, only truths that must be uncovered for liberation. In the process of self-discovery, resistance will inevitably arise. The human mind tends to cling to the familiar, even if it causes pain. Overcoming this discomfort is key to transformation. One must be willing to step beyond the threshold of discomfort to discover a new version of themselves. When a person begins to live in alignment with their true self without fear or shame, the surrounding world reflects these changes. Destructive relationships disappear, not because they are expelled, but because there's no longer an internal anchor supporting them. It's like changing the frequency on a radio receiver. One is no longer tuned to the old wave, and consequently the static disappears. At this point, a genuine metamorphosis of the personality occurs. One begins to attract into their life what harmonizes with their essence, not through desperate searching, but by creating an internal space for this attraction. This is where the profound power of self-love lies. As Jung asserted, when an individual ceases to be a mirror reflection of their emotional wounds, the surrounding world stops perceiving them through that prism. There's no longer a need to convince others of one's worth, to beg for love, friendship, or respect. It's enough to become someone who generously gives these to themselves, and then people with negative intentions withdraw on their own, as there is nothing left in that person to attract them. When the painstaking work on one's inner world begins and genuine relationships with oneself are built, the world around starts to resonate entirely differently. This isn't merely about maintaining a positive attitude or mechanically repeating motivational affirmations in front of a mirror. It's something far more fundamental, a change in energetic vibrations, in self-perception, and in how that perception shapes one's lived reality. The Swiss psychiatrist and philosopher Carl Jung emphasized the significance of individuation, the path of becoming an individual, during which one discovers their true essence by integrating all facets of their self, including those rejected by society or upbringing. The key point here is that complete self-knowledge and self-acceptance make a person immune to manipulation. Someone who has stopped seeking external approval and no longer needs others to confirm their worth, having found it within themselves, becomes unmanageable. Recall moments when you had to yield, allowing others to overstep personal boundaries. Perhaps it stemmed from a fear of loneliness, a belief in the need to be understanding, or a deep-seated idea that love requires sacrifice. Jung would explain this tendency to concede as a manifestation of an unintegrated shadow, a part of the personality that has learned to link love with suffering. Yet, a liberating truth exists. Love should not be a source of pain, exhaustion, or inadequacy. True love, both for oneself and others, conversely expands horizons, inspires, energizes, and elevates. Any relationship systematically leading to depletion, anxiety, or the feeling of needing to exert excessive effort to earn love are not true love. They are, rather, a reflection of unhealed emotional wounds. When this realization dawns and attempts to justify what feels harmful cease, genuine personal transformation begins. Often people fear the necessity of letting go of the past. They stubbornly cling to relationships they know aren't serving them, and to behavioral patterns that drain their vitality because the uncertainty and emptiness ahead seem more frightening than familiar suffering. However, Carl Jung taught that genuine personal transformation only occurs when one finds the courage to face this emptiness, when they free themselves from everything that no longer resonates with their inner world, without immediately seeking a replacement. If people consistently appear in one's life who drain their energy, who seem to enjoy diminishing their dignity or making them feel the constant need to prove their worth, this is not by chance. Such situations serve as a reflection of unhealed inner wounds. But there's good news. Anyone can change this dynamic at any point in their life. There's no need to wait for others to change or for external circumstances to shift. Change begins within the individual themselves, in their self-perception, in the boundaries they set, and in how they react to the actions of others. When a person gains true self-love, their inner energy transforms, becoming evident to others. There are no longer openings for manipulation, false promises, or emotional games. This isn't due to insensitivity, but to a clear vision of what was previously hidden. They no longer deceive themselves by excusing unhealthy behavior. At this point, people with dark energy naturally recede. This doesn't mean life will be without challenges or that everyone will become perfect, but one's reactions to situations will change. They will no longer cling to destructive patterns or feel the need to convince anyone of their worth. Simply living in alignment with their authentic self will be enough for everything around them to reorganize. An unspoken law operates in the universe. It reciprocates the energy one emits into the world. If an individual treats themselves with respect and love, circumstances and people who are a mirror reflection of this positive disposition are drawn into their life. Those unable to sustain such a high frequency gradually distance themselves. This occurs not due to deliberate rejection from anyone's side, but because they no longer find what they need in that person. This process reveals one of the key principles formulated by the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung: projection. What causes discomfort or irritation in others, prompting strong reactions, often reflects unaccepted aspects of one's own personality. Conversely, when internal contradictions subside and a person achieves full self-acceptance, the external world stops presenting situations that mirror their former struggles. There's no mysticism in this phenomenon. It's a regularity explainable from the perspective of depth. Psychology. When a person experiences self-love and self-respect, their unconscious ceases to project needs and traumas onto others. They no longer attract those who seek to exploit their energy, because the vulnerability that previously allowed this to happen disappears within them. This is the secret, accessible to far too few. True self-love is not merely a matter of self-esteem, but a process of profound internal transformation that reflects in everything surrounding an individual. People whose hearts are clouded by a desire for power, a hunger for manipulation, or who are simply mired in negativity cannot long remain near those who have managed to break the chains of internal limitations. It's like being on different wavelengths in different dimensions of consciousness, and what's most striking is that no active effort is required to repel them. They simply vanish from sight, realizing the impossibility of gaining any benefit. However, achieving such freedom demands unwavering devotion to oneself. One must possess the courage to look at oneself without embellishment, not avoiding the inner work from which many flee, preferring to dissipate their attention on external distractions. This path is not strewn with roses, but it is the only road to an authentic and fulfilling life. When a person decides to love themselves, when they bravely face their shadow sides instead of hiding from them, the world around them begins to transform. The right people appear in their life, not as a result of desperate searching, but because their inner energy has changed so profoundly that only those who resonate with this new vibration can remain close. And here arises a key question. Is each of us ready to do this work? Ready to let go of everything that no longer serves and allow ourselves to live in accordance with our true nature? If the answer is affirmative, one can confidently say that the world around will change beyond recognition, surpassing the boldest expectations. When a person begins to live guided by sincerity and deep self-respect, their life undergoes astonishing changes that previously seemed unattainable. It's not merely the distancing of ill-intentioned people, but a harmonization of the entire surrounding environment with their true essence. However, to achieve this transformation, one must realize that self-deception is unacceptable. It's impossible to project an image of confidence if, deep down, doubts about one's own worth persist. One cannot demand respect if internally they continue to tolerate unacceptable treatment. The surrounding reality is a mirror reflection of one's inner state. Carl Jung asserted that individuation is the process of becoming who one truly is. It's crucial to understand that this process doesn't happen spontaneously. It requires painstaking inner work, confronting suppressed aspects of the personality, and exploring emotional wounds that influence interactions with others. Most importantly, it requires letting go of what no longer serves one's current stage of life. The fear of impending change often becomes the cornerstone that keeps people in destructive relationships and unfavorable circumstances. One tends to convince themselves that familiar suffering is better than the unknown, that perhaps they are over-dramatizing the situation, or that they should show more tolerance and understanding. However, it's essential to clearly distinguish between understanding and self-sacrifice. As Jung stated, whenever a person tolerates something that contradicts their inner essence, they commit an act of self-betrayal, and this internal betrayal does not go unnoticed. Over time, it manifests as fatigue, dissatisfaction, and anxiety. One senses that something is wrong even if they can't articulate it. It is at this stage that many make the fatal mistake of trying to find solutions in the external world. They strive to change others, seek validation from them, and exert efforts to fix situations, unaware that genuine change must occur within themselves. The day a person decides to set personal boundaries, not to control others, but because they have realized their own worth, becomes the starting point for profound transformations. They stop attracting those who seek to exploit their insecurity, no longer succumb to manipulation, and do not enter into exhausting relationships. Most importantly, they no longer need to make grand pronouncements or justify themselves to anyone. Their inner energy speaks for itself. Self-love manifests not in words but in concrete actions, in how one treats themselves, which relationships they maintain, and which they choose to relinquish. When a person grasps the truth, realizing there's no need to beg for what is already theirs by birthright, life itself begins to flow smoothly and harmoniously. Those accustomed to preying on others' weaknesses, insecurities, or blurred boundaries naturally retreat, sensing they can no longer manipulate this individual. This happens not due to deliberate rejection, but as a result of a change in their inner frequency, their energy field. Similar metamorphoses occur with opportunities, with the choice of places where one feels comfortable, and with the decisions made. Everything begins to fall into place like pieces of a mosaic, because the individual finally achieves harmony with their true essence. However, it's important to understand that this process is not a straight line. Along the way, moments of doubt and temptation to revert to old familiar behavioral patterns are inevitable. The fear of loneliness or change can make one question the correctness of their chosen path. It is precisely at such pivotal moments that it's especially crucial to remember Carl Jung's wise words. Personal growth only occurs when one dares to face the unknown, when they are ready to step beyond their comfort zone and explore the uncharted territories of their soul. The essence is not at all about becoming an insensitive and isolated individual. The true goal is to cultivate such a strong connection with oneself that the need for external validation of one's worth simply disappears. Upon reaching this milestone, one discovers that their relationships with others undergo radical changes. They are no longer dictated by need, fear, or emotional dependence. Instead, these are unions based on mutual respect, where there is no room for intrigues or manipulations, and where everyone feels the freedom to be themselves without fear of rejection. And the most astonishing aspect of this transformation is that a person filled with self-love and self-respect inadvertently inspires others to adopt a similar attitude towards themselves. Self-love is truly contagious, not in an arrogant or egoistic way, but as a deep and genuine feeling. People ready for self-improvement will undoubtedly respond to this energy, while those who still cling to destructive behavioral patterns will naturally step aside. This is the true power of self-love. There's no need to impose anything or convince anyone of your worth. One simply lives in accordance with their true essence, and the world reciprocates. For when an individual decides to respect themselves, the entire universe seems to conspire to return the same. When an individual begins to be guided by genuine self-love, a new horizon of awareness opens before them. Many interpersonal connections previously maintained are revealed to lack true intimacy, serving merely as attempts to fill internal emotional voids. Carl Jung, the eminent psychologist, emphasized the significance of projection as one of the most influential mechanisms hidden in the depths of the unconscious. It is this mechanism that often pushes people to interact with those who merely reflect their own unresolved inner conflicts. Consider relationships initially doomed to fail, people who drain energy without any reciprocation, and recurring behavioral patterns. All these events are not coincidental. Each such experience offers an opportunity for deep self-analysis, allowing one to identify aspects of the personality that desperately seek external validation, while the true answer lies within. When a person decides to look honestly within themselves, they begin to realize that many of the relationship dynamics they experienced were born from an unconscious need for approval. Perhaps at some point in life they learned that to win love, one must please others, that love is a trophy requiring sacrifice, or that one's worth is determined by the amount given. Jung would call this a conditioning of the psyche, an idea deeply rooted in consciousness and subtly governing interpersonal relationships. However, the remarkable thing is that everyone has the opportunity to break this vicious cycle. One can decide to no longer prove their worth, not take responsibility for others' healing, and realize that self-love doesn't depend on the amount offered. When a person commits to internal transformation, their entire life undergoes fundamental changes. Those who previously seemed to hold unlimited power over them lose their influence, not due to changes in their behavior, but as a result of the individual's own metamorphosis. They cease to succumb to manipulation and no longer feel an acute need to prove their worth to others. One-sided, draining relationships become a thing of the past. Consequently, people who seemed an integral part of their life gradually disappear, as if they were never there. No active steps are required to remove them from one's life. There's no need to explain why they no longer align with one's new perspectives and values, or to justify personal growth. One simply begins to emit different vibrations, rejecting the frequencies of dependence, self-sacrifice, and self-destruction, and this is palpable. People with negative energy, those who feed on others' weaknesses, cannot long remain in the presence of someone who has found inner harmony and self-assurance. Their energy no longer finds access to this individual's inner world. They realize they've lost control, and then, without unnecessary conflicts, arguments, or explanations, they depart. This is the great power of self-love. It is not a shield one uses to protect themselves from the outside world, but a bright inner light, so powerful that everything that doesn't resonate with it simply dissolves in its radiance. Instead of expending effort on futile attempts to please everyone, one begins to attract into their life people who harmonize with their inner world, situations that foster personal growth, and relationships that inspire and support rather than exhaust. However, to achieve this harmony, one must make a firm commitment to themselves. It's not enough to merely understand this concept intellectually. It requires daily application of its principles in practice. One must be ready to say no when something doesn't align with their values, to fearlessly let go of what no longer serves, and to allow themselves to be their main priority without feeling guilt. Initially, such an approach might seem unfamiliar, but with time comes the realization that this is precisely how one should live. This doesn't stem from a fear of losing others, but from the certainty that those truly meant to be by your side will never ask you to betray yourself. Upon reaching a state of genuine self-love and acceptance, one realizes that life is no longer about adapting, seeking approval, or settling for less. It's about consciously choosing the energy one allows into their life, surrounding themselves with people who enrich them rather than those who only consume without giving anything in return. The most astonishing aspect of this process is that it occurs naturally when one begins to live in accordance with their true essence. People who once drained him, made him doubt himself, or took advantage of his weaknesses gradually disappear from his life because there is no longer room for them. This isn't because the person becomes closed off or detached, but because their energy transforms into something that can only be sustained by those who vibrate at the same frequency. Carl Jung, a distinguished researcher of the human psyche, emphasized that integrating the shadow aspects of one's personality paves the way for a transformative shift in perceiving the world. When an individual stops seeing others as reflections of their own unresolved conflicts and embraces personal responsibility for self-improvement, the world around them seemingly ceases to test them by presenting the same problems in different guises. And here lies a profound truth. Achieving this metamorphosis doesn't require an arduous struggle. There's no need to try and convince anyone or deliver grand speeches about the changes that have occurred. Proving anything becomes unnecessary. The only thing truly essential is to follow the call of one's inner compass, continually strengthen the connection with oneself, and firmly adhere to the principle of not allowing anything into one's life that contradicts one's true essence. True self-love is not a manifestation of egocentrism, arrogant self-exaltation, or an escape into isolation. It is an awareness of one's own worth and deservingness of the best, supported by corresponding actions. It is a deep understanding that one's energy is a priceless resource that should not be expended on people and circumstances that hinder personal growth. The most surprising thing is that when one unswervingly adheres to this truth, life generously rewards them by bringing authentic connections, meaningful opportunities, and a state of inner peace that once seemed like an unattainable dream into their path. I invite you to pause for a moment and reflect. Recall times when the fear of loneliness or loss forced you to compromise your principles and desires. Remember those situations when your inner voice told you that something was wrong, yet for the sake of preserving relationships, you had to tolerate discomfort and dissatisfaction. Now, it's worth asking yourself, what might have happened if your own interests and self-respect had been prioritized? How would the trajectory of your life have changed if you had managed to refuse compromises that didn't align with your true needs and aspirations? Now is the time to act. Don't wait for favorable changes in external circumstances or anyone's approval. Starting today, this very minute, you can begin to treat yourself with the love and respect you have, until now, fruitlessly sought from external sources. And if this step is taken, the world around you will begin to transform, reflecting your inner changes.